Hello, everyone. So I'm here to discuss the Kyle Rudolph $36 million 4-year extension, and this contract gives him an average of $9 million a year. And among current tight ends, there is no one making exactly $9 million a year like this. But Gronk was supposed to. So if you want like a little measuring stick, I guess you could use that one because Gronk is Gronk. And I do know Minnesota's looking to run more 12 personnel, you know, plays and formations, things of that nature. And I just think 9 million is a little bit ridiculous for a player who doesn't really give you the same versatility and just dynamic play that some of these other tight ends do that are making that much. Because currently, that $9 million a year, if you're just talking about the 4-year extension part, would make him the fourth highest paid tight end among current players. And the three above him are Jimmy Graham making 10 million, Kelsey at $9.368 million, and Jordan Reed at 9.35 million. And the three, well, when the three are healthy, the one thing they have in common is they are vertical threats, they are mismatches in the passing game, and they do things that make you really game plan that Kyle Rudolph doesn't really do. And he does have very similar numbers to Jimmy Graham, which is kind of a double edged sword in this case, just because I know there are people that'll say, like, well, since he's the highest paid one, he had similar numbers. This contract makes sense. We got him for $1 million less. Good on them. That's a good job. And you could look at it that way. But the way I kind of look at it is there are a lot of people who are surprised Jimmy Graham's still with Green Bay. There are a lot of people that want to just run him right out of town. So if you look at it this way, you know, the numbers, if they're similar, they're very similar because, well, 82 targets for Kyle Rudolph, 89 for Jimmy Graham, 64 receptions for Rudolph. Although Graham did have 55, Rudolph had 634 yards, 636 yards for Jimmy Graham, although he had less receptions and he had 9 less. So yards per reception, 9.9 for Rudolph, 11.6 for Jimmy Graham, 4 touchdowns for Rudolph, and 2 for Jimmy Graham. So very similar numbers, especially if you were to take out the Detroit game where you basically take away 120 yards and 2 of his touchdowns, which is half. So if you take that out, he's not doing much from a year where they had the sixth highest amount of pass attempts. So they're just throwing the ball all over the place. And Rudolph wasn't really that big of a factor in it for the most part. And I'm just thinking, these were a disappointment by a player who's only going to be making $1 million more now than Kyle Rudolph. So when Rudolph produces the same numbers that he always has, like that, and how disappointed are we when it comes to that? Because we didn't even factor in Irv Smith taking away some of these targets, catches, touchdowns, because he is a really dynamic playmaker when it comes to that tight end spot. He can kind of be moved around. He's your new move tight end who's going to be like, he will play tight end. He'll probably play some slot receiver. He'll play some outside receiver. He might play some H back. He might play some fullback even. So he's a player they're going to move all around, and he easily could take away some of the production from Kyle Rudolph. So, is he worth 9 million with a player that isn't horrible, but at this stage in his career, more of this safety blanket red zone kind of guy because he's a big dude. He's almost 6'7". I don't think it really is, and I do know this is something that could be coincidental, but I do think it might be worth mentioning the fact that all of his career highs come in years where you can say that offense was bad that year for like the overall offense anyway. In 2016, he had career highs in targets, receptions, and yards, catching 83 of 132 targets for 840 yards He had a career high in touchdowns in 2012 with 9, where it kind of felt like, if it weren't for Adrian just having that historical year, they had no business making the playoffs. Almost none. And his yards per reception was in 2013. That was his career high then for that, which was obviously the year where they had the whole Josh Freeman thing. Christian Ponder in his third year didn't really step up to the plate. We got some Matt Castle in there, who was the best one of the three, and things kind of fell apart. They went 5-10-1. That one tie coming in Green Bay when I think Scott Tolzien was playing, and it just got it wasn't good. But that could be a little bit telling that all of his career highs in some of these major stats come in years where our offense is almost just entirely inept, especially in 2016 when you would kind of look at like, oh, he had 83 catches for 840 yards and 7 touchdowns. He had a really good year, and the offense couldn't move. Like, we would almost go into games expecting like, well, the defense better score about, you know, 14 points on their own because there's no way the offense can get past 7 or 10. And that's how that year was viewed. And that was his really good breakout year. He had the numbers anyway of that sort to speak. And it could be coincidental, I know. But I do think it could be also potentially telling that all the good things happen when all the bad things are happening. And I do know, and I am well aware, that calling him overrated is kind of a bad thing to some people. And it's an unpopular opinion, but I do think he is an average player, and I do think he's quite overrated. And this contract could create some massive issues down the road, depending on the guaranteed money and how it's structured, because that's yet to come out as I'm making this video at least. And especially when you start to look at people who are entering their contract year this year, which are Mackenzie Alexander, Trey Waynes, even, and David Morgan, Stephen Weatherly, Anthony Harris. You have a lot of guys entering contract years that they will like to keep, and spending $9 million on a tight end that isn't dynamic could end up being a real issue because you brought in a dynamic tight end to go with him, and all of a sudden you're talking about there's a chance that based on how the NFL is today, Irv Smith could take over the starting spot. And I know that's a little weird to think about just because Rudolph's been the only tight end getting targets since Shenko left, essentially. Uh, it's a little weird to think about, but it is a thing that could potentially happen because of all the things Irv Smith can do. He can block and he can run routes well for the most part, and he's able to get separation from guys. He's an athlete, and Rudolph doesn't really do any of those things as he kind of just uses his size to outjump people, which is hard to get him down there because he's not really the fastest guy. So I think this contract has the potential to be kind of a horrible thing for us, especially since I think he's been kind of declining since that 2014, 2015 kind of years, I would say. Like, it has been kind of noticeable. So, declining player, 4-year contract, fourth highest paid. If they're if this is it, like if this has to be a little worse for Rudolph than it is coming off on the surface, because otherwise this could be a massive problem. I do know this is an unpopular opinion among some folk, but I was kind of hoping if they gave him an extension, it would only be for a year or two at most, and we'll take care of the rest later because of, once again, he's declining anyway, not really that dynamic. Then I thought there was a chance we could get some David Morgan involved more because I think for the most part in the passing game, Morgan kind of gives similar traits. And he's a much better run blocker, as Rudolph's kind of a very lackluster run blocker. He's not a very good blocker in general, and he's a very average pass catcher. He just has really reliable hands, and he's big, which makes him really good as a red zone guy or a check down guy on third down. But that's about it. I don't think you pay that $9 million a year. I'd like to know what you guys think down in the comments below. Till next time, I bid y'all adieu.